Okay, well, thank all of you for coming out. Thank you, Marvin, for your great work for 9/11 Truth and taking this into the political arena. This is the most important thing anybody can be doing, and it's good to see that there are folks who are aware of it and taking serious action. Okay, well, we're going to talk now, mostly tonight, not so much about the original 9/11, but about the French 9/11. Now, the French 9/11, that's the subtitle of the book that I put out about the Charlie Hebdo affair that happened January 7th. The title is We Are Not Charlie Hebdo. Free Thinkers Question the French 9/11. And this, I think, is the first time that not only has a big apparent false flag event been deconstructed in real time by internet sleuths like many of us, but also the first time that a serious, even somewhat scholarly book about it has come out within less than 3 months after the event. That would be the equivalent of this kind of book coming out about 9/11. It's like David Ray Griffin's New Pearl Harbor or something like that, coming out in December 2001 or January of 2002. And that would have changed history if that had happened. We had to wait for a couple of years for David's book. It took a while to get up to speed because many of us had never seen anything like that before. We couldn't imagine that such a gargantuan lie could be told in such brazen fashion. Well, now we can imagine, like Condoleezza Rice, who could imagine? Well, we can imagine now, and we got them this time. But not right away, at least I didn't. I hate to admit this, but they fooled me with this Charlie Hebdo shooting for at least 5 minutes. No, my first reaction was an emotional reaction. And that's how most people operate. I mean, most of us perceive the world through emotional filters, whether we know it or not. Many of these filters are unconscious, right? In many cases, we emotionally filter out information that's going to mess with our ability to make a living, for example. We filter out information that's profoundly disturbing, that reminds us of traumas we had when we were children, that makes us have terrible fears about, for instance, authority figures doing bad things, people that we should be able to trust not being trustworthy. These sorts of emotional filters keep us from facing certain kinds of information. Well, when I heard that there had been a shooting in Paris on January 7th, and that a group of allegedly radical Muslims had shot up the Charlie Hebdo magazine offices in retaliation for anti-Islam cartoons, my first reaction was, oh man, that sucks. Because, I'm Muslim, and I've been kind of in the middle of this war on Islam that's been going on, and I am ultimately angry at the deceptive forces that are pushing the war on Islam, but I'm also sometimes angry at stupid, ignorant Muslims who react emotionally and stupidly and violently sometimes. Let's face it, there are a few of them out there, although they don't do nearly as much damage as we're often told. But I thought that this looked plausible to me. Sure, angry Muslims might have done this. Well, I wasn't the only one. Khalil Bondib, a Muslim cartoonist from Berkeley, California, he actually makes his living doing newspaper political cartoons, which is quite a feat. His first reaction was this tribute to the slain Charlie Hebdo cartoonists. A mighty new river is born from the ink of your pens, the blood of your veins, and the tears of your fans. And he, in particular, named 2 of these cartoonists, who he considered to be sort of his slain, martyred brother and sister cartoonists. So he, too, was first emotionally affected, believing the official version of Charlie Hebdo. But very quickly, he and I and many others noticed that there were problems with the way that this event was being reported in the mainstream media, problems with the Twitter campaign, a mass Twitter campaign with a hashtag, Je suis Charlie, I am Charlie, that was pushed immediately after these shootings, problems with the gigantic demonstrations of millions of people that broke out around France within a few days of this shooting. Take a look at this demonstration. I don't know if that looks like any demonstrations you guys have here in Portland. Are you able to produce signs that look that identical? I don't know. In Madison, Wisconsin, the peace in the community has demonstrated quite a number of times in my recent memory, and I've never seen anything like this. Literally, probably over 1 million identical signs were printed up for these demonstrations almost overnight. Wow. I don't know who that protest committee is, but they sure have their thing together. That looked pretty suspicious to a lot of people. The orchestrated unanimity. And perhaps because of this in part, a lot of folks quickly saw evidence challenging the official version and broke that false unanimity. One of them was Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Dr. Roberts is the architect of Reaganomics. He was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury under Reagan. He was an editor of the Wall Street Journal. And here, almost, 3 days or 4 days after the Charlie Hebdo shooting, Paul Craig Roberts had written a piece calling it a likely false flag. And look, it was published at the Ron Paul Institute. Wow. Ron Paul and his son Rand being a rising political force in America, that's really something. We had high-level politicians and think tanks and media around the world quickly calling this Charlie Hebdo affair a likely false flag. Again, this is being deconstructed in real time. The first time something like this has happened. It's amazing. We had the president of Turkey, President Erdogan, calling this a false flag by NATO, designed to stir up hatred of Islam. We had the mayor of Ankara, Turkey, saying the same thing. We had big-time Russian media, Russian think tanks saying the same thing. We even had a politician in Southern California, Mr. Lindblad, making international headlines, calling this a likely false flag, just days after it happened. Well, over in France, perhaps the most important of the people questioning this event, calling it a likely false flag, was Jean-Marie Le Pen. This is the guy who founded the National Front Party. His daughter, Marine Le Pen, is likely to be the next French president. And here he is, shortly after the Charlie Hebdo shooting, saying that this was the work of Western intelligence agencies. It wasn't just a couple of radical Muslim brothers who went and shot up the cartoon offices. This was an intelligence operation and a false flag. Wow. He's one of the most important political figures in France. Then less than a week later, coincidentally or not, the news was reported that Jean-Marie Le Pen had shown up with bruises all over his face and his house was partly burned down. And the news story said that he was injured trying to escape his house after a fire broke out. When one of the most important political figures in France says this, the Charlie Hebdo shooting was a false flag, less than a week later he's got bruises all over his face and his house is partially burned down. That would be rather an interesting coincidence if it were indeed a coincidence. Okay, so why are all these people calling it a false flag? All sorts of reasons. They saw the identical signs, the massively funded Twitter campaign, social media campaign. Somebody was pushing this thing for all it was worth instantly after this shooting happened. And then, as millions had marched for free speech, at the same time that was happening, suddenly the French government embarked on the biggest crackdown on free speech in the history of modern France. They began rounding up people for making political remarks that were politically incorrect. And it's even for humor, even for cartoons like Charlie Hebdo. One of such victims was a young man from a lycée, a French high school, who parodied a Charlie Hebdo cover. And this is his parody. Now, the original item that he was parodying was a Charlie Hebdo cover, and this is something I learned after the event, that Charlie Hebdo had indeed been provoking Muslims by publishing really obscene and blasphemous stuff. This wasn't just political satire or religious satire. This was really over the top, totally pornographic. So this particular cover wasn't exactly pornographic, but it was rather disgusting. The Charlie Hebdo cover that this is parodying was, it came as peaceful pro-Islam demonstrators were being shot down in the streets of Egypt after the coup d'etat by General Assisi and the overthrow of the first democratically elected government in the history of Egypt. Thousands of peaceful pro-Muslim Brotherhood demonstrators were being shot down in the streets. So Charlie Hebdo published a cover on their magazine showing a demonstrator with a beard, an Islamist, right, holding a Quran. And a bullet was going right through the Quran and through his body, and he was dead. And the legend said, "The Quran is shit. It doesn't stop bullets." Now, whatever you think about the Quran and blasphemy, that's not a very nice cover because thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators, okay, they're Muslim, sorry, whatever, being shot down. Charlie Hebdo was approving of it and laughing at them. That's pretty sick. Well, okay, so the parody here was that this high school student put Shaw, the editor of Charlie Hebdo, who was killed, we're told, in the shooting, in place of the pro-democracy demonstrator. And instead of the Quran, he's holding Charlie Hebdo. Bullets going right through it. It says, Charlie Hebdo is shit, it doesn't stop bullets. Equally disgusting, but maybe a little bit more clever than the original. So they gave him a tribute and arrested him for it. They also arrested France's best known and most controversial comedian, Dieudonné Mbala. Dieudonné was a huge mainstream TV success in France until he started criticizing the Zionist lobby's control over the French government and media, and making fun of it, making jokes about it. And suddenly they started arresting him for making these kinds of jokes. He's been arrested a number of times, most recently, right after the Charlie Hebdo shooting. Dieudonné put out a tweet that was a very dark joke, and they arrested him for his tweet. Now, his joke was, he put out the tweet that said, Je me sens Charlie Coulibaly. I feel like Charlie Coulibaly. Now, this was while the millions were marching in the streets saying, I am Charlie. So he didn't exactly relate to that. He said, Je suis Charlie Coulibaly. Coulibaly was one of the so-called terrorists. Coulibaly was the African Muslim terrorist who was shot down by police after allegedly killing a policeman, taking hostages, and killing 4 hostages in a kosher deli in Paris. So Dieudonné was saying that he felt more like a terrorist than like Charlie Hebdo. And maybe he feels like a terrorist because they keep hunting him down and arresting him. And he probably felt even more like a terrorist after they arrested a humor terrorist after they arrested him for this joke. I'm sorry?
He paid $42,000.
Yeah, and that was just for this one, right? Or no, he's paid a huge amount. He's broke. He's gone bankrupt because of all the fines for all of the arrests that they arrested him for hate speech, for making these dark satirical jokes. Okay, so enough. The reaction is all wrong. Everybody's marching with identical signs, huge push in the social media, false unanimity, people being arrested for jokes. Something's wrong with this picture. And that leads you to ask yourself, oh, okay, let's step back a moment and think about this event. Who gained from it? You know, since 9/11 in particular, we've come around to noticing that when there's a really big, spectacular, apparently orchestrated media event with a huge propaganda push behind it, you have to ask yourself, who gains? Who benefits? Who's getting something out of this? And it's not probably the radical Muslims. I don't see them gaining a whole lot from this Charlie Hebdo shooting. I certainly don't see them gaining a whole lot from 9/11. And then, as you ask who benefits, look back in history, in similar events, and see who benefited from them, who staged them. Well, we now know, if we look back at the history of terrorism in Europe since World War II, that virtually all of the high-profile cases were not what they appeared to be. During the Cold War, there was a program called Operation Gladio. It orchestrated the wave of supposed left-wing terrorism that ravaged Europe during the Cold War. At the time, I remember being in high school and college and hearing about the Baader Meinhof gang in Germany and the Red Brigades in Italy. I remember hearing about the assassination of Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro. And all of those things were, plus the Brabant shootings in Belgium, people massacred in the streets, supermarkets and sidewalks, the Bologna train bombing in Italy, all of this mayhem was blamed on the left. And maybe most people today probably still think that, but they shouldn't, because it's been proven 7 ways from Sunday that all of that was orchestrated by your tax dollars at work. Seriously, it was the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States of America through NATO were creating this terrorism. They were using their paramilitary forces in Europe, right-wing paramilitary mercenary types, were running around killing people in order to blame it on the left, in order to keep Europe under NATO occupation, in order to prevent Europeans from electing left-wing politicians who would have liberated Europe from NATO occupation. This is a quote from somebody who was actually arrested for this supposed left-wing terrorism, but he's a right-wing paramilitary mercenary. He's a Blackwater operative, basically, back in the day. And here's what he said. He said he would attack the civilians, women, children, people far removed from any political gain in order to allow the authorities to bring in a state of emergency. This was called the strategy of tension. Scare people, stir them up with fear. And then the right-wing Fox News type politicians move in and they seize power and they keep the independent-minded left out of power. That's how your tax dollars kept Europe under right-wing authoritarian occupation during the Cold War through false flag terror and its propaganda value. Okay, let's fast forward back to Charlie Hebdo. Another strange thing that happened after Charlie Hebdo was the photoshopped photo op. Hey, that rhymes. We were told and we were shown on television and in the media the pictures and videos of world leaders leading a march of millions to support the slain Charlie Hebdo martyrs, leading millions through the streets of Paris. The only problem was that never happened. Even though we saw it on TV, it never happened. Yeah, look at that lower image. Yeah, Netanyahu came even though he was specifically disinvited by President Hollande of France. Hollande was there, Angela Merkel was there, and they were marching not in front of millions of people. They were off on a side street. They had been carefully barred off by security people, and there they were with their lackeys behind them, not millions of people. And then they photoshopped it to create that image on the top that everybody saw. Supposedly the world leaders leading the march of millions. You couldn't ask for a better example of the Orwellian disinformation that pervades our mainstream media than these pictures. Interestingly enough, even though President Hollande of France invited US President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry to Paris, they both turned him down. Whereas Netanyahu, who was specifically disinvited and told to stay away, came anyway and barged into that photo op. What's going on here? Well, to figure out what's happening in the high circles of power today, you have to do what the Russians did back in the days of communism. The Russians knew that what you read in TASS and Pravda under communism is probably not the truth. You have to read between the lines. And between the lines, these subtleties clue you in as to what kind of power struggles are happening in the upper echelons of the party. Well, we're living under the same kind of dictatorship right now. Our media is every bit as controlled as TASS and Pravda were under the Soviet Union. And in order to figure out what's going on, you have to read between the lines. So reading between the lines is not that hard. You can see that there's a big factional fight going on between the neoconservative hardline Zionists, who are friends of Netanyahu, who want to have all-out war on Islam, and especially want to get a war going against Iran, versus the realists. The realists say, hey, we should be messing with Russia and China. They're the real adversaries. What are we doing screwing around with Israel's enemies? Why are we wasting trillions of dollars in an endless war on Israel's enemies just for Israel and killing our whole Western civilization and its ability to defend itself against the Russians and the Chinese? That's the basic factional fight. So Kerry and Obama are realists. They are skeptical about this multi-trillion-dollar, multi-decade utter annihilation of the Middle East on behalf of Israel. And that's, of course, what the so-called war on terror really is. So they didn't go to Paris. And to me, that's a signal that maybe Paris was with a false flag done by the neocons. And the realists were not that happy about it. Bibi Netanyahu, of course, was very proud of it. When he showed up in Paris against, specifically disinvited, he comes in, he was like was a mafia chief, barging into the funeral of his victim. And then, after showing up in the front lines of that bogus march through the streets of Paris, Bibi Netanyahu went straight to the Grand Synagogue of Paris. And there, he called on all of France's 500,000 Jews to immediately flee France and go to Israel, which would solve Israel's pressing demographic problem. That's their big problem there, is that today, a majority of the people in historic Palestine now are not Jews, they're Arabs. And that discrepancy is growing all the time. That's the big problem that Israel has. That plus the fact that nobody in the region can stand them, or will accept them as legitimate. So to try and solve the demographic problem, Bibi wants the French Jews to flee to Israel. There's a huge propaganda push on this that's still continuing even now. Now, Bibi Netanyahu is a very interesting guy. He's the guy, of course, whose first reaction to 9/11 on September 11, 2001 was, it's very good. He said, what do you think about these terror attacks in New York, which just killed 2,000 people? It's very good. And then he caught himself saying, well, it's not good, but it's good for Israel. Well, here's a guy who really never met a false flag attack he didn't like, apparently. And the interesting thing here is that he actually delivered what looked like threats to France shortly before this happened. In August of 2014, about less than half a year before the Charlie Hebdo attacks, he says, if France criticizes Israel instead of the terrorists, this plague of terrorism will come to your country. He's threatening France. But wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. If France supports the Palestinians and the Muslims, why would they come and terrorize France? So who would come and terrorize France if France does that? Bibi himself. Okay, and then again, in November, just a month and a half before the Charlie Hebdo attack, Bibi Netanyahu warns France that the recognition of Palestine would be a grave mistake. A warning that sounds a whole lot like the warning that Dick Cheney gave Paul Wellstone less than a week before Wellstone's plane went down, killing Senator Wellstone and his wife and daughter and campaign staff. And indeed, France, in December, a month before the Charlie Hebdo shooting, recognized Palestine. That's exactly what Bibi warned them against. And suddenly, boom, France is punished, just like he said they would be. Very interesting. It's almost like he's not even trying to hide it. Well, that's one aspect of the Charlie Hebdo affair. The neocon Zionist Netanyahu side, they certainly thought they had something to gain, right? Keep the war on terror going, terrorize the French Jews and flee to Israel, etc., etc. But they're not the only ones who gained. And in the book, We Are Not Charlie Hebdo, Webster Tarpley, one of our greatest analysts of terror, a brilliant alternative historian, has a chapter in which he argues that the Israeli angle here is actually kind of a false flag in itself. He thinks that the real issue was that France had been getting too independent. That is, once again, just as in the days of Charles de Gaulle in the early 60s, when France was getting too independent, they weren't following American policy. And so they had to be terrorized back into submission. There were dozens and dozens of US attempts to kill Charles de Gaulle in those days. None of them succeeded. They did finally overthrow him in May '68 with those manufactured demonstrations. In any case, President Hollande was following de Gaulle's path of relative independence from US NATO occupation. Charlie Hebdo, Hollande had really angered the American authorities by trying to make peace with Russia and trying to torpedo the sanctions on Russia. Huge split with NATO here. And likewise, he had also gotten out of line on Libya as well. And finally, he had been supporting the Syriza anti-bankster party, or we thought it was the anti-bankster party, in Greece. So here we had President Hollande wasn't listening to his NATO masters. And so according to Webster Tarpley, sure the Israelis gained, sure they probably helped out with it, but this was really about smashing France back into submission to NATO, which is essentially call it the US military occupation of Europe, or call it the corporatocracy, or the New World Order corporatocracy's military occupation of Europe, whatever you want to call it. According to Webster, that's what this was really about, was to terrorize France and torpedo all of these independent initiatives by President Hollande. Well, if that was the purpose, sure, they sort of punished Hollande for being independent, but then they gave him a bonus when they terrorized the whole country back into line with NATO. His popularity shot through the ceiling, just like what happened to that illegitimate son of a Bush after 9/11. Remember that? That's what he was. He was the unelected, illegitimate son of a Bush, stolen the election, everybody hated him. The guy obviously had no business serving as dog catcher in Podunk, Iowa. And here he's in the White House. Are you kidding? His popularity was like 15% or 10. He's heading for zero. And suddenly 9/11 happens. He became overnight the most popular president in the history of the United States. So Hollande didn't quite benefit to that extent, but his popularity too had been going down through the basement, and Charlie Hebdo affair knocked it way up.
That's if polls are to be believed. I think polls themselves are a bunch of disinfo.
Polls are highly imperfect ways of understanding public opinion, but sometimes, I think it's true that people rally behind leaders in these situations. So let's look at some of the specific evidence around the Charlie Hebdo shooting. Why did Dr. Paul Craig Roberts call it a likely false flag just a few days after it happened? It wasn't just all this contextual kind of stuff I'm telling you about. It was also concrete specific evidence. Here is a case of a shooting, or an alleged shooting, of a French police officer outside the Charlie Hebdo office, on the sidewalk. And I can't show you the video now because my laptop melted down and died in San Francisco. I've got a new one and I haven't gotten it up to speed for this yet. But what happens here is the terrorist, the guy pointing the gun at the head of the policeman on the sidewalk, supposedly fired an AK-47 round straight into his head from point blank range, killing the policeman. So take it from me, if you go and watch the full video here, you will be puzzled because what you actually see is, well, let's see if I have my laser pointer here for you. Not really, oh, that's the wrong one. Oh, yeah, there it is. So, let's see. Okay, see that? That's like a puff of dust on the sidewalk there. Okay, he just fired a shot. You just heard the bang, and the puff of smoke hits the sidewalk there. And as he goes by, you'll see that this police officer is totally untouched. There's no blood, there's no reaction, his head doesn't even move in the slightest from supposedly being hit from point blank range with an AK-47 bullet, which is like this, it's like a torpedo, for goodness sake. So, what's going on here? Most of us have looked at this video, including a lot of ballistics experts, such as my militarily trained colleagues over at Veterans Today, say that this is a smoking gun. This guy wasn't shot in the head with an AK-47. What looks like happened here is that the guy playing the terrorist goes by and stages a fake shooting. Now he's shooting blanks. You can't risk shooting AK-47 live ammo on the streets of Paris, even in a kind of a drill situation. So he's got cotton wads or paper wads in there as blanks, and he has the politeness to refuse to fire a blank point blank into the policeman's head because that would hurt. You know, it wouldn't hurt as much as an AK-47 live round would, but it wouldn't feel very good. You wouldn't want to be shot from a meter away with a blank, even from an AK-47. So he shoots and misses over there like a meter away. Right there. Okay, so what's going on here? That looks like a fake stage shooting. And people have had to ask themselves, well, if they're lying about this, if the shooting, and the media is still telling us that this was the moment that the police officer was executed. The media, to this day, insists that this shooting was real, when it clearly wasn't. What's going on? Even worse, when the media showed this video, they censored it. They didn't actually show the shooting. They showed right up before the shooting, and then they showed right after the shooting, but they didn't show the actual shooting or non-shooting, because it's obviously a non-shooting. And when they censored it, they said, we can't show you this because it's too bloody. Well, the problem was the exact opposite. It wasn't bloody enough. In fact, there was no blood. There wasn't a single drop of blood. And the guy's head didn't react in the slightest to being shot from point blank from an AK-47. So, but they had the temerity, the unmitigated audacity to tell us that they couldn't show us this because it was too bloody. You can't make this stuff up.
Also, there was no recoil.
Yeah, there was no recoil, right? No recoil from the gun either.
Yeah. She was asking, why is the guy already laying on the ground?
And what's he doing on the ground in the first place? Yeah. There were other indications of possible sort of choreographed action here, like a film studio. And the guy who took that, the guy who took the image was he apologized profusely for putting it on the internet. It looks like this might have been the left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing, right? Somebody who's maybe somewhat involved with this thinks he's going to put out this video that's going to have a huge propaganda effect, and the camera angle and the action are just wrong enough that you can see that it's not a real shooting. And he maybe didn't think of that at first, or maybe he didn't know that he was not supposed to put it on the internet. Anyway, he went crazy, bending over backwards, apologizing for having put it on the internet. All right, more problems with the official story of Charlie Hebdo. The official version is that the first event was on January 7th, when the Kawachi brothers, two low-life, ghetto-dwelling French unassimilated Muslims, angry young Muslims, burst into the Charlie Hebdo offices and shot, they killed 11 people and injured another 11 in the offices. And then, a couple of days later, just as they were caught and killed, this third terrorist, Koulibaly, killed a policeman, and then took hostages in a kosher deli and got shot down. So that's the official version of this. Problems. Well, one is that these Kouachi brothers were very well known to all intelligence agencies, French intelligence and British intelligence in particular, and the mainstream media reported that and asked, well, how is this? We're told these guys were ISIS-related, card-carrying ISIS guys who'd been to ISIS in the Arabian Peninsula, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They travel all over the Middle East doing terrorist kinds of stuff. But if they were that well known to the intelligence agencies, that's interesting. Where did they come from? Well, they actually, one of them was arrested for child pornography a couple of years before this event, and that case was then made to go away. If you know anything about the way the authorities, not just in France, but even here in the USA, interact with the Muslim community, you know that that means that he was an informant. If you have any kind of scrape with the law, you're a Muslim, especially a radical, ghetto-going Muslim like these guys, they're going to make you an informant, and then the charges go with it. So clearly these guys were, or at least one of them was an informant for years. Now informants essentially take orders from a controller, like an intelligence agency case officer who tells them what to do, and then they get paid. So that's probably what these guys were. And maybe that's why they didn't even try to capture them after the Charlie Hebdo shooting. We're told that these guys were working for big-time terrorist groups that were plotting more horrible attacks, and yet nobody wanted to capture and interrogate them. They were hunted down like dogs and shot down. Reminds you sort of what happened to Bin Laden, right? Or what supposedly happened to Bin Laden. Does that make sense? These high-level connected terrorists, parts of these very dangerous terrorist groups, for all we know, they're going to sneak a nuclear weapon in a suitcase into a city and set it off, right? You kind of think that if that's the case, you would want to spare no expense. You'd sacrifice any number of lives even to capture people like this alive and interrogate them and take down their networks. If you hunt them down like dogs, that means that they're not really well-connected terrorists. They're probably people who have information that you don't want to get out, and they're being silenced. This was the moment when I said, okay, they're not even trying to hide this false flag anymore. When Bernard Cazeneuve, the Interior Minister of France, announced that the only reason that they caught these Charlie Hebdo terrorists was because one of them had dropped his ID card in an abandoned getaway car. Now that was very convenient, wasn't it? That was a kind and compassionate thing of the terrorists to do to make it so easy to catch him. But wait a minute, these guys had taken great precautions to hide their identities. They wore ski masks. They acted very professional. The witnesses said that they looked like special forces guys. So, wait a minute. And then they throw down an ID card and they abandon their getaway car. And this had all kinds of interesting repercussions to those of us who followed similar cases down through the years. For instance, sorry?
Muhammad
Well, yeah. Well, actually, the passport recovered outside the World Trade Center. The only thing left with that plane, except for one engine part that didn't come from the right plane, was the passport of Sukhami. It wasn't actually Ada. It was erroneously reported as Ada's, but it actually belonged to a guy named Sukhami. But it was discovered by a source whose name we still don't know. An anonymous source finds this passport, this hijacker's passport, delivers it to the authorities, and disappears anonymously. And we're expected to believe that. And the same thing happened at Shanksville, where there were two more hijackers' passports discovered outside the 15-foot hole in the ground in Shanksville, where the entire 9/11 plane supposedly buried itself in the soft ground. The only thing that they found outside there was like a little scrap metal, two passports, and a Shia bandana. Now, what are the Al-Qaeda hijackers doing wearing Shia bandanas and throwing down their passports as their plane disappears completely into soft ground? I don't know. Anyway, dropped ID cards, of course, are classic. You know, that when the authorities want to frame somebody for something, they throw down ID cards. If they want to frame a guy they shot down, the cops shoot somebody down, they'll often throw down a gun and say, yeah, he was armed. It's getting harder to do that now with all the video cameras around. But... Okay. Somehow, Bernard Cazeneuve, the French Interior Minister, knew that there were 3 terrorists even before there were 3 terrorists. Right? On the day of January 7th, the witnesses saw 2 guys. We're told they were the Kouachi brothers. 2 guys in ski masks coming out of the Charlie Hebdo offices and then firing blanks, pretending to shoot a cop, I guess. But there were just 2 of them. However, Bernard Cazeneuve, the Interior Minister, announced just hours after the shooting that there were 3 terrorists. What made him think that? There's no reason to think that. And then, 2 days later, they've tracked down those two brothers and shot them dead. And that on the same day, this guy, Hamid Murad, he was on the list. In other words, the authorities say, we know who it was now. We got this ID card. And it was these two brothers plus this third guy, Hamid Murad. Nobody'd seen the third guy at Charlie Hebdo offices. Hamid Murad, I think he knew the Kouachi brothers vaguely, immediately went to the precinct of his local police department and said, I'm innocent. I was in school. I have witnesses. And so he was exonerated. Interesting. They didn't get to shoot him down and silence him. But then, lo and behold, a third terrorist did show up. Monsieur Koulibaly, that we mentioned earlier, the guy that Dieudonné joked about. 3 days later, this guy Koulibaly suddenly shows up as the third terrorist, supposedly acting in sympathy with the Kouachi brothers. He shoots a cop, takes hostages in a kosher deli, and 4 people get killed, and then he himself is shot down. But wait a minute, something wrong here. This is the moment when he's being shot by cops, and for some reason, in the video, you see him it looks like he's being thrown in front of a window, and his hands stay very tightly together the whole time as he's being shot down. It sure looks like he's been handcuffed or had his hands tied. Now, if he was handcuffed and then thrown in front of the window to be shot down, that casts a very different light on what we're told happened in that deli. Monsieur Koulibaly, that we just saw being shot down with his hands apparently cuffed, turns out to have been an old operative in the network of Sarkozy. They call him Sarko in France. Sarkozy is a radical Netanyahu-style Likudnik Zionist who took over France after the era when Jacques Chirac, the French president, refused to go to war in Iraq with us, and so we had to retaliate by refusing to eat French fries, only freedom fries. Remember that? Well, he was too independent-minded, so the forces of whatever you want to call it overthrew him and installed Sarkozy as the next French president. Now, Sarkozy is a radical Likudnik Netanyahu-style Zionist. When he was president, a lot of people said, wow, France is now under complete Israel, not just Israeli, but extremist Israeli occupation. And here, Mr. Koulibaly, the guy who turned into a Charlie Hebdo terrorist or a kosher deli terrorist, here he is, years earlier, in a staged political event with none other than Sarkozy. Now, it could be a coincidence. This ghetto-dwelling, troublemaking young Muslim, maybe he just happened upon Sarkozy, but actually this supposedly happened at the presidential palace. So somehow I don't think that Koulibaly, the ghetto-dwelling youth, just happened to wander onto the grounds of the presidential palace to have an encounter with Sarkozy. It looks like an engineered encounter, a political event, and this is what they do with their assets. If you're an asset of some intelligence network, they'll use you for various things, maybe as a patsy, maybe they'll kill you and blame something on you, or maybe before they do that, they'll engineer a political event, a photo op, where Mr. Sarkozy can say, look at me, I'm a man of the people. I even interact with black African Muslims from the ghettos of the banlieue outside Paris. And that's what this was. Okay, huge smoking gun showing that there's something really wrong with this Charlie Hebdo case. The suicide, or ostensible suicide, of investigator Henri Fredoux. My slogan for the Charlie Hebdo affair is, Je suis Henri Fredoux. Je ne suis pas Charlie. I am not Charlie, I'm Henri Fredoux. Henri Fredoux was investigating an amazing break or clue in the Charlie Hebdo case on the very night of the Charlie Hebdo shoot. He called home and he said, wow, I've got this thing, I'm gonna have to stay up all night working on this. I'm not coming home. Well, he didn't come home, because he was found 1:30 or so a.m. with a bullet in his head in his own office, in the police precinct. What's that about? Well, the authorities tell us it was a suicide. His family doesn't believe that. They say there's no reason this guy would commit suicide. And his family wanted to see the autopsy report. They were denied, which is actually a contravention of French law. I don't know if they're pulling a national security thing or what, but they won't let his family see the autopsy. So what was Henri Fredoux investigating that got him shot? Well, he was looking into the suspicious family background of this young lady on your right, Jeanette Bougrab. Jeanette Bougrab is quite notorious in France. She is the French version of Pam Geller. the notorious Islamophobe who's always staging anti-Islam propaganda events here in the U.S., buying bus ads, doing obscene pictures of Mohammed contests, this sort of thing. Well, over in France, the same type of person here is Ms. Bougra. Now, what's really strange about this thing is, okay, she's a super hardcore Zionist Netanyahu friend of Sarkozy. She was actually high up in the government of Sarkozy. So, after the Charlie Hebdo shooting, she shows up in the media saying she lost the love of her life when Sharp, the editor of Charlie Hebdo, was murdered by the evil Muslim terrorists, and she cried and she did histrionic grieving all over the media for her lost love, saying that he was her significant other, they were a family. And here's the one picture she produced to support this, right? Only one problem. All of Sharp's friends and family say that he didn't have any relationship with her at all. Another woman was his girlfriend, and so they all said that she's a liar. So the friends and family of Sharp, the slain editor of Charlie Hebdo, barred Jeanette Bougra from Sharp's funeral, calling her a liar. A huge battle played out in the French press, especially the gutter press, where these kinds of scandals are, of course, they sell copies of newspapers. So you go back and look at the French press, story after story after story, especially back right after the Charlie Hebdo shooting, with the two sides sniping at each other. She's saying, oh yes, he was the love of my life, and everyone of Sharp's family and friends saying, she's lying. You don't know her. Well, among the other lies of hers that have been fully exposed was the fact that she said even though that she was in item with Sharp and they were a family, she never had a key to his apartment. Well, that's a lie, because at one point she got the key to Sharp's apartment. It was right after his death. It was right after the Charlie Hebdo shooting. She, using false pretenses and taking advantage of the gullibility of Sharp's grieving parents, she got the key from Sharp's grieving parents on the night of the shooting. And shortly thereafter, Sharp's apartment was completely cleaned out. When the police got there, there was no evidence, nothing was all gone. Everything was gone. The place was scrubbed, even the fingerprints. She's the prime suspect in setting up the cleaning up of Sharp's apartment. Here's a real victim's widow here. This is Maurice Walensky. She's the widow of Georges Walensky, the most talented and the greatest of the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists. You may say, well, wait, Kevin, you're a Muslim. You can't say that any of these Charlie Hebdo cartoons were great. Well, Walensky was. And not only that, he didn't take part in this pornographic Islam bashing. He had a very established career as a wicked political satirist in France going way, way back. And it was tragic that he died. I assume he really did die. And his widow here, Maurice Walensky, is saying she doesn't believe the official story of how he died. She doesn't believe that this was just a couple of ghetto angry Muslims that managed to pick the right day to go to Charlie Hebdo and kill all those people. She points out that, why was Charlie Hebdo's security downgraded a week before the attack? She points out, wait a minute, this was the only time in all history that the entire staff of Charlie Hebdo got together. Sure, they had staff meetings at other times, but on this particular meeting, there was they had a party for Pasquale or some French holiday. There was a French holiday party, and apparently maybe they were handing out bonuses or something. They got everybody in there. So she's pursuing that angle. She's the French version of the Jersey Girls, the widows of the 9/11 victims, who wouldn't shut up and have been pushing for the truth ever since. Well, strange things happened to me once I got involved with this Charlie Hebdo case. One of them was a fake BBC website went up. Very well done. It looked just like the real BBC. They even did a video that sounded and looked exactly like the real BBC, only it wasn't. And it purported to be a BBC report saying that there were all these unanswered questions and false flag indicators in the Charlie Hebdo case. And a lot of us looked at this and said, what? BBC is reporting the truth about something like this? What's going on? And of course it turned out it was a hoax. The question is, who did it and why? Who would go to all that trouble of producing such a high quality fake BBC website? Was it somebody who wanted to spread the truth about Charlie Hebdo? Or was it somebody who wanted to make us look stupid for believing that this was a real BBC report? Or was it somebody who was tracing the way that if a major news organization actually reported the truth about something like this shortly after it happened, how would that truth spread on the internet? And then how could it be shut down, right? So maybe they had little bots chasing all the trails, like if you try to send the URL of this, maybe that went onto their map. You know, if you email a URL of us, you post on your social media pages, whatever. However you're spreading this, maybe it was a trial run just to see how they could stop a big story that was really dangerous. Like if the BBC or even any major legitimate news organization ever really tried to expose a big false flag like this, it would create a crisis for the powers that be. And even the people who didn't do the false flag would fear the social instability that could follow. So maybe this was one of those operations to see how they could stop news like this from spreading. I don't know, but it sure was weird. Here I was on BBC, so I thought. Okay, another strange aspect of Charlie Hebdo was, okay, it's not enough that these two terrorists who've hidden their identities should drive their getaway car to a street in the middle of Paris, abandon that getaway car, throw down an ID card, and then carjack another getaway car. Where did they do it? Well, they showed, these guys are supposedly radical Muslim terrorists, but they chose the exact center of the biggest Jewish section of Paris, and guess what was there? Pâtisserie. Pâtisserie is a bakery cafe where every year the radical Zionist terrorist owners, they're tight with the Jewish Defense League, have a big celebration that's sponsored by the Jewish Defense League, or JDL, which is a terrorist group. It's so late, the FBI has called it a terrorist group. They're technically illegal here in the US, not so much in France and Canada apparently. So every year they have a huge party sponsored by the terrorist group, the Jewish Defense League, celebrating the success of the Israeli Defense Forces in massacring Palestinians. Happens every year right there. This is where the radical Muslim terrorists supposedly drove to abandon the getaway car, throw down their ID, and carjack another car. And the guy whose car was carjacked, he said the terrorists were very polite when they took his car, and they simply said, "Well, tell the media that it's Al Qaeda in Yemen." Okay, more Charlie Hebdo video weirdness. This was from a video that went onto the mainstream media, but they degraded it. It was actually a fairly high quality video, and before they showed it on mainstream media, they degraded it, and then they washed out this area over here, right here. See that guy? There's a man standing on the terrace out there filming. He's got a camera in his hand. Perfectly situated to film the escape of the Charlie Hebdo terrorists. Two guys in ski masks that pretend to shoot the cop on the street, right? He's right there filming it. Well, all we know about him is his name was supposedly Janek, J-A-N-E-K. He's supposedly some kind of undocumented Polish worker, and he's just disappeared. He's gone. Now, how did he know to be up there with that camera just as those guys would race out of the Charlie Hebdo building after the massacre, pretend to shoot a cop, jump into a getaway car, and drive off to Pâtisserie to throw down their ID card? How did he know to be there? Well, who is he? Whose building is he? Who owns that building? Turns out it's a close associate of Laurent Dassault. Laurent Dassault is a multi-billionaire. Apparently he has French-Israeli dual citizenship. He's a pillar, some would even say maybe the pillar, of the Israeli military-industrial complex. And he's an extreme right-wing Likudnik, associate of Netanyahu. That's the guy whose friend owns the building. And then they washed out Janek, so we couldn't see him. So we couldn't even see anybody who was there in the mainstream versions of that video. Okay, one item in the book that is wrong, and it's the only one I found that's clearly factually wrong. So please buy the book and try and find something else that's factually wrong. In fact, if you can send me something that's clearly factually wrong about that book, I'll send you a prize. I'll give you a free book or something like that. So please do that. But the only thing that's factually wrong so far that I can find is the report that Charlie Hebdo was bought by the Rothschilds shortly before the terror event. Turns out that's not true. There was a story in a Dutch newspaper that sure made it sound like that, but it was written in such a way that it could easily be misinterpreted to mean that. In fact, it turns out that the Charlie Hebdo was ostensibly run as a kind of a workers' cooperative. Sharp, the slain editor that we saw with Jeanette Legrub, was the main decision maker. The finances were very murky. It had been losing tons of money for years and somehow still managed to publish and pay the printer. But the Rothschilds didn't buy it right before the shooting. Instead, they stepped in right after the shooting. Libération, the French alternative newspaper, was bought by the Rothschilds a few years ago. So they own Libération, and as soon as this Charlie Hebdo shooting happened, the Charlie Hebdo survivors just went to Libération, which then printed up the 5 million copy print run. The biggest print run in the history of French journalism. The biggest pile of money ever made in French journalism was made right after this Charlie Hebdo shooting. And who printed those 5 million copies? Libération, otherwise known as the Rothschilds. So yes, the Rothschilds did in fact print those 5 million copies, and for all I know, they may have printed the 5 million signs, the identical signs that we saw. But they didn't buy Charlie Hebdo right before the shooting. That was false. We haven't yet corrected that in the book. It will be corrected when the e-version of the book comes out shortly after I return to Wisconsin later this month. Okay. So, what did this Charlie Hebdo thing accomplish? It kind of fired up an old meme and turned it into a new meme. The old meme, going back to 9/11, as you may recall, was, why do they hate us? They hate our freedoms. So how should we respond? By destroying our freedoms. Let's burn the Bill of Rights and have the Patriot Act. Wait a second. Isn't that giving the terrorists what they want? Well, it doesn't matter if it's illogical. In fact, it's better that way because it paralyzes people's brains. When these completely illogical contradictions are forced down our throats and we don't protest, they've just killed our ability to think critically. And so they got away with 9/11 in part by forcing those kinds of contradictions down our throats. Well, same thing here at Charlie Hebdo, but they said these evil Muslims hate our freedom to mock Islam, right? And so we're going to have to burn our freedoms in France, and they crack down on free speech in France. Exactly the same thing. So now the new meme is angry radical Muslims versus cartoonists. And that's really being played up for all it's worth. In Copenhagen, a little over a month after the Charlie Hebdo shooting in Paris, same thing happens. Exactly the same thing, right? Paris, we had an attack on cartoonists who don't like Muslims, and then an attack on a Jewish target. In Copenhagen, exactly the same. An attack on the Danish cartoonist who was riling up the Muslims, and then an attack on a synagogue. Exactly the same. And those two events, Charlie Hebdo and Copenhagen, carried forward a pattern that had happened earlier. As one of the chapters in We're Not Charlie Hebdo explains, there was an earlier incident a few years ago in which the same thing happened. There was an attack on a national symbol, in this case French soldiers, and then a supposedly related attack on a Jewish target, in this case a Jewish school. And as you'll read in the book, it looks like the second part, the shooting at the Jewish school, attributed to the radical Muslim Muhammad Merah a few years ago, never happened. It looks like they faked it, and there was no proof that anybody ever died there. There were no autopsies. The victims were supposedly immediately sent to Israel for burial as national heroes, but there's no proof of death. And our investigator, Laurent Guyeno, who's a PhD medievalist as well as a PhD engineer, a very accomplished guy, suspects very strongly that there was no such shooting. Okay, so but once again, we have this two-part thing. First, an attack on national values such as freedom, liberté, right? Then an attack on a Jewish target. Over and over and over, 3 times in a row here. And that reminds me a little bit of the anthrax attacks. Remember the anthrax attacks? Yeah. The anthrax letters, which terrorized the 2 leading opponents of the Patriot Act, Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy in the Senate, and which killed a guy that the Bush family hated because he published scurrilous photos of Bush's daughters, etc., etc. Those anthrax letters killed some Americans, terrorized the rest, had scrawled on the envelopes, "Death to America, death to Israel. Allah is great." We now know that even the US government admits that this had nothing to do with Muslims. Some non-Muslim insider, and they're telling us it was Bruce Ivins, in the German warfare complex, sent those letters out as a false flag, falsely blaming Muslims. Okay? Interesting though, that death to Israel, death to America, Allah is great. Tying together Israel and the Western country, right? Just like in the Charlie Hebdo, just like in Copenhagen, just like in Muhammad Merah. It's not like they're hiding it very well. You may recall that after 9/11, dancing Israelis were arrested for filming and celebrating the 9/11 attacks. They were caught high-fiving each other in front of the burning and exploding Twin Towers. They took pictures of each other flicking cigarette lighters in celebration in front of the burning towers. They were caught with thousands of dollars in cash stuffed in their socks. They were working for Urban Moving Systems, a known Mossad, Israeli intelligence front. They were held for a couple of months, failed lie detector tests, and then were shipped back to Israel, where they went on national television in Israel and said, we were only there to document the event, that is 9/11. How did they get all set up for that and know there was an event to document? I don't know. In any case, those dancing Israelis, when they were first questioned by police, or grabbed by police, after somebody saw them celebrating and called police, the police came and grabbed them. The Israelis said, don't arrest us, the Palestinians are your problem. And they're our problem. Palestinians are our problem, and the Palestinians are your problem. So we have seen this pattern over and over and over. Israelis celebrate these attacks, and over and over and over the attacks are clearly designed to try to unite people in identifying the interest of the Western country, whether it's the US or France or Denmark, with the interest of Israel, and uniting against the evil Muslim terrorists. Now in the real world, yes, the Islamic world is struggling against Israel, which is an apartheid at best, genocidal at worst, settler colonial state in the heart of the Muslim Middle East. They have a huge problem with Islam, with what they would call radical Islam, what they would call terrorism. The Israelis have a huge problem. But in the real world, what's their problem is not America's problem. Somebody didn't like that. Okay, so the Charlie Hebdo affair is the gift that keeps on giving. They keep recycling Charlie Hebdo. In Garland, Texas, Pam Geller, the American version of the young French lady we saw pretending to be the Charlie Hebdo editor's significant other, Jeanette Rugrave, Pam Geller is organizing these draw obscene pictures of Muhammad contests, and sure enough, on cue, two deranged Muslims show up at this Draw Muhammad contest in Garland, Texas, get out of the car. They have guns in the car. I don't know if they were carrying guns when they got out, and they're shot down like dogs. We were told, well, radical Muslims attack cartoonists, just like Charlie Hebdo, just like Copenhagen. Right. And they had all kinds of these Draw Muhammad provocations all over the country, even on the 4th of July. As Clyde said on the radio show, they were having, instead of watermelon eating contests and three-legged races on the 4th of July, they're having Draw Muhammad contests. He said, what's this country coming to? Well, this is all going back to Charlie Hebdo. So, as this event got deconstructed in real time, I decided to put this book together, recruited a total of 21 folks, most of them we would call leading public intellectuals, questioning the orthodoxy around this Charlie Hebdo attack. And the book's getting great reviews. David Ray Griffin calls it a breakthrough. Dr. Griffin being the Dean of 9/11 Studies, a man who's done more to publicize questions about 9/11 than anybody. Richard Falk, who's Jewish himself, but who's almost as unpopular with the hardline Israelis as I am, if not more so, endorses the book. Paul Hellyer, former Canadian Defense Minister, says if you want to know what's really going on in the world, you have to read books like this. Paul Craig Roberts has an amazing resume, as I said, former editor of the Wall Street Journal, architect of Reaganomics, one of the 100 most influential people in the world, according to Who's Who. He helped inspire the book by questioning it early, and he has an updated version of his early piece on this event in the book. Cynthia McKinney, who's become a close friend of mine, I didn't know her personally when I voted for her in 2008, and ever since then I've probably said, don't blame me, I voted for Cynthia McKinney. Boy, does she ever have a hard-hitting chapter in this book, too. She just got her PhD in, let's call it what it is, false flag studies. Man, I'm jealous. I want to teach false flag studies. I guess that's what I sort of do. I just don't get paid for it. But Cynthia is working with Dr. Peter Dale Scott at the University of California. And she just finished her dissertation. It's on Hugo Chavez, but she's all doing this whole assassinations and false flag studies thing. And she believes, as I do, that Hugo Chavez did not just die of cancer. He was killed by, cancer has been weaponized going way back to JFK. Jack Ruby, the guy who silenced Kennedy's patsy killer, Lee Harvey Oswald, died quickly of a fast-acting cancer in prison, right after he said he wanted to be taken to Washington to tell what he knew. Okay, so they've been killing people with fast-acting cancer for anyway. She's caught him doing that to Hugo Chavez, and she has a brilliant piece in this book. Webster Tarpley, A good friend of mine. I love to argue with this guy. He's like Jim Fetzer. He's brilliant, opinionated, and I just like to argue with Fetzer. Anyway, he's got a really good piece in the book, as I said, going into the way that this event seemed to be designed to bring France into line with Asia. John Cobb is widely regarded as America's leading liberal Protestant theologian, one of our top intellectuals, professor at Claremont College, and he's a founder of Process Studies, the most interesting movement in theology probably in the last century in the English-speaking world. And here he is in the book telling you why he doesn't identify with Charlie Hebdo, and then he says, you know, if you can't stand to really question governments and the media, don't read the rest of this essay. And then he says, sure looks like a false flag, and here's why. Rabbi Michael Lerner is in this book. Now, I have an interesting conflicted relationship with Rabbi Lerner. There are 3 Jews in this book, by the way. 2 of them, including Rabbi Lerner, are very strong defenders of Israel. So naturally, I don't see eye to eye with him in a lot of ways. But give him some credit. He contributed to my earlier 9/11 anthology, 9/11 and American Empire, and that was a great essay. This time, he's not calling Charlie Hebdo a false flag, but he is questioning the media propaganda. And actually, he had a horrible, they vandalized his house, and that wasn't that long after he contributed to my 9/11 book. And now he's getting all skittish about being involved with all these conspiracy theories, and he's kind of trying to get some distance from the Charlie Hebdo inside job stuff in the book. And I don't really blame him, because I wouldn't want my house vandalized either. Imran Hossein is a leading Islamic scholar with a very hard-hitting and controversial essay in this book. Now, this is the most amazing essay to me, is the one by Barry Chamish. He's one of Israel's leading investigative journalists. He is a best-selling author. He's the guy who wrote the book on the Rabin assassination conspiracy in Israel. He's a strong supporter of Israel. And not just that, he's actually a right-wing Likudnik. You'd think he'd be friends with Netanyahu. You'd think he would like Netanyahu. He hates the left-wing labor Zionists. This guy, a strong defender of Israel, has no use for Arabs, Palestinians, or whatever. Here he is in this book, telling the truth as he sees it, which is that he thinks that Bibi Netanyahu looks like he was behind this. He's saying it looks like the Prime Minister of Israel was behind this Charlie Hebdo false flag, and that the main motive would have been to scare French Jews into fleeing to Israel and solving Israel's demographic problem. When someone like Barry Chamish says that, you sit up and take notice. I think that's front page news. It says the New York Times wouldn't report it. I had to report it myself for better as today. But hats off to Barry Chamish. I mean, I really respect the guy. A lot of hardline Zionists I don't get along with. Barry, he loves the truth. He's not going to lie to himself intentionally. I think he lies to himself unconsciously. We probably all do. But he's basically a decent guy, and I have tremendous admiration for him telling the truth as he sees it in this book. We have Yvonne Ridley, one of the Muslim world's leading journalists. She converted to Islam after she was already a well-known journalist in the UK. She slipped into Afghanistan right after the US invasion in 2001 in a burqa, was captured by the Taliban, was well treated. She promised them that she would look into Islam if they let her go when she got back to the UK, and she did. She discovered it looked like there had been an American plot to kill her and blame the Taliban, and then she sat down and read the Quran and ended up converting to Islam. She's been a leading Muslim journalist ever since. And we have the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei, represented in this book as well. Right after the Charlie Hebdo affair, he wrote a beautiful letter to the youth of the West, begging them to think twice about these misrepresentations of Islam that are flooding the Western media. And in particular, he said, don't let them present their own recruited terrorists as representatives of Islam. To me, that's a very powerful message. Okay, so we got pushback in this book. Like, as soon as I started doing this book, crazy stuff started happening. First, the President of France announced that due to the spread of Charlie Hebdo conspiracy theories, it looked like we might have to ban conspiracy theories at the French, European, and international levels. Really? Well, that's what Obama's information czar said as well about that. Cass Sunstein, he was Obama's information czar, and he said a few years ago that it might someday to ban conspiracy theories, make it illegal. But in the meantime, the government should just infiltrate conspiracy groups, cognitively infiltrate them, and disable the purveyors of conspiracy theories. That didn't sound very nice. You gonna disable me? Anyway, so now this guy, Hollande, the president of France, is jumping on board, saying we're going to have to ban conspiracy theories, we're going to have to lean on the internet providers and stop this stuff from spreading. And his personal think tank, the Jean Jaurès Institute, put out a police report on conspiracy theorists, naming the 5 most dangerous of the world's leading intellectuels conspirationnistes, or conspiracist intellectuals, and I'm very proud to say that I made the list. I'm one of the top 5. I actually wrote in a thank you letter. And then I pointed out that Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, who we didn't name as one of the leading conspiracy intellectuals, is in my book, Calling Charlie Hebdo a False Flag. Dr. Roberts has a Medal of the Legion of Honor from his economic work. He said, well, look, if Dr. Roberts has this medal, and he's not on the list of the top 5 conspiracy intellectuals, and I am, where's my medal? I want a Medal of the Legion of Honor. So I invited myself to Paris and suggested that he should bestow this honor on me. And I even photoshopped it just in case it didn't happen. And of course it hasn't, because I'm still waiting for that invitation. Well, meanwhile, Canada doesn't seem to be all that friendly to these kinds of researches either. I tried to go to a Toronto event, a pretty big Toronto event that was getting all kinds of publicity in May. And I was stopped at the border. They ran my passport. It was all normal until she ran my passport. And suddenly, her face was like, oh, I'm Bin Laden's nephew or something. And then I just got hammered with the most hostile border interrogation I've ever received. I was interrogated by the FBI at the Newark airport once. And they spent, a minute being hostile. But it was nothing compared to this. They held me for several hours, and I was denied entrance into Canada on this bizarre, bogus stuff that, there's a bunch of stuff that somebody salted my FBI police record. There were supposed arrests that they had listed there that never happened. Like, supposedly I was arrested once for felony drug dealing. I think I would know that if that happened. Anyway, I went to the Americans now, and I have a piece of paper showing this is my real record, and there's none of that stuff on it, so I should be able to get into Vancouver for my talk tomorrow, God willing. God and the Canadian authorities. Okay, I'm getting pushback from the ADL, the so-called Anti-Defamation League. It poses as an anti-racism group, but the ADL is just another Israeli propaganda outfit. What they really do, what they're paid to do, is to tarnish the reputations of anybody who the Israelis see as a threat. So they put out a big hit piece on me and on this book. They try to portray the book as the anti-Semitic conspiratorial ravings of Kevin Barrett. They hardly even mention the other people in the book. Well, most of the book is these other 20 leading public intellectuals, many of them far more impressive in their accomplishments than I am. But the ADL didn't really want you to know that. And then even in the truth movement and outside it, these death threats have resurfaced. When I was being pilloried by Fox News in 2006 as the evil conspiracy professor from Wisconsin, Lynn Cheney's group APTA, which is an anti-academic freedom group, they basically are policing the academy on behalf of the neocons. They put out this attack on me to their spam email list, their AstroTurf list of knuckle-dragging Fox News watchers, and told them to email me at the University of Wisconsin. Gave them my email. Email this evil conspiracy professor and tell him what you think of it. So I got this deluge of really hostile, angry emails from these people, thanks to Lynn Cheney. And there were dozens and dozens of death threats, most of them with misspellings of very simple, even in some cases, 3-letter words. So I tried to make a joke of that, saying, well, if they can't spell cat, C-A-T, they probably are in no position to really cause me any damage. And I had some jokes, but anyway, so I went through this wave of those kinds of death threats back in 2006, and then a few years later, when I was doing some unusually effective work, suddenly I noticed that was the time that these crazy people, like there's some radio host from Georgia who put my home address on the internet and said, go kill this radical Muslim Kevin Barrett, basically. And that's now resurfaced, thanks to this Charlie Hebdo book, I think. And then there's these fake truthers at this place, Truth Move Forum, wishing death on them. So all sorts of really strong pushback has happened, I think because this book is actually bothering certain people. And I'm told from my French contacts, including one guy who used to be in Algerian intelligence, and he's still kind of plugged into the networks over in France and in the UK, he says that they're totally freaked out because Charlie Hebdo just blew up in their faces. And this book is, of course, the most scholarly and serious compendium of Charlie Hebdo skepticism. So the book's there on Amazon. The first review, which popped up right after it went up on Amazon, long before anyone could have actually bought, much less read the book. There's no ebook, so it's only a physical book, right? I put it up on Amazon, and like 3 minutes later, practically, whatever, right away, this so-called review pops up saying, evil anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist Kevin Barrett is blah, 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 blah. Do not buy this book unless you want to fund insanity. That's where I put it. Wait a minute, okay, how's your review book? Something, you know, it couldn't possibly have been shipped to you until like a week and a half after that. Anyway, so I complained to Amazon, and so for a while, for a week or so, the only, 10 days, the only review out there was this so-called review. And of course, that might have discouraged sales to a certain extent. But finally, Amazon took it down, and now there are only real reviews, and so far now it's up to, I don't know, 17 or 20 or something, and they're all 5-star. So there it is, you can get it for 20 bucks, or 17 something plus shipping on Amazon, and you can get it here for only 20, so you'll save at least like a quarter or something if you buy it from me here. It's getting great reviews from serious people. This is a review by Barry Zwicker, he was the Canadian Bill Moyers, very respected, semi-mainstream media critic, until he came out on 9/11 as a truther, and then they tried to marginalize him, but he's still one of Canada's leading media critics. And Graham McQueen, who is a Canadian professor, wrote the book on the anthrax attacks. So those two guys teamed up to write a very good review of the Charlie Hebdo book. And there it is on Amazon, and I guess we're at the end of the show, so I can do a Q&A, and then I can sell and sign books. Thank you so much.